One of the defining characteristics of the Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is his never say die spirit, which allows him to frequently overcome nearly insurmountable odds to save the day. Because Peter is motivated by the great lesson he learned after the death of his Uncle Ben in Amazing Fantasy 15, with great power must also come great responsibility, Peter's persistence is unwavering. Except there have been numerous times in the history of Spider-Man comics where Peter has straight up given up. These moments are born from another defining characteristic of Peter, his relatability as an everyman. Dude's lazy sometimes, and I can respect that. And with all that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 5 times Spider-Man overcame great odds, and 5 times he quit. Let's start with the times he succeeded, because I'm feeling optimistic. Number 5, defeating MORLUN. J. Michael Straczynski kicked off his run on Amazing Spider-Man with a bang. The 5-part Coming Home storyline presents a new take on Spider-Man's origin. It introduces the mystical Ezekiel, another man with spider powers like Peter. Ezekiel raises the idea that perhaps Peter has inherent totemic powers and that the radioactive spider bite he received as a teenager was just a means to awaken them. It then introduces a brand new supervillain, MORLUN, a vampiric monster that feeds off totem powers. MORLUN is a true force to be reckoned with, beating Spider-Man to a pulp multiple times throughout the arc. But Spider-Man finds a way to overcome this monster. Rather than avoiding another confrontation with MORLUN, Spider-Man demonstrates his courage and ingenuity by allowing him to feed on him. In doing so, MORLUN is actually weakened by Peter's blood, which was made radioactive by his spider bite. Using the rallying cry, "I'm not pure," Peter is able to beat down a weakened MORLUN and drive the monster away, at least for a little while. Number 4, overcoming 6 of his deadliest foes. After Stan Lee and Steve Ditko introduced most of Spider-Man's greatest foes during their historic creative run on Amazing Spider-Man, the duo decided that for Spidey's first ever annual issue, he would face off against 6 of them at the same time. Dubbed the Sinister Six, Dr. Octopus, Electro, Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, Vulture, and Sandman conspire to defeat Spider-Man once and for all. They kidnap Spider-Man's Aunt May and Peter's then-girlfriend Betty Brant, forcing Spider-Man to run his impossible gauntlet of villains. Adding to Spider-Man's misery is the fact that towards the beginning of the issue, he suddenly loses his spider powers. But even without his powers, Peter pledges, "If this be my finish, at least I'll face it like a man." Fortunately, Peter's powers return in the nick of time. Using his strength and guile, he's able to outsmart and defeat all 6 villains in succession, including Doc Ock as the final boss. Number 3, pulling himself out of the grave. Kraven the Hunter found a way to elevate himself from B-list villain to upper crust baddie very quickly during the critically acclaimed 1987 storyline, Kraven's Last Hunt by J.M. DeMatteis and Mike Zeck. In it, Kraven shoots Spider-Man with a tranquilizer, buries him alive, and then dons his costume in an attempt to prove he is superior. While in the ground, Spidey hallucinates that he sees his long-term friend, Ned Lees, who was just recently revealed as the Hobgoblin and killed. Seeing Ned makes Spider-Man think he's dead himself. He goes into fetal position and sees himself turn into a spider. Thinking about how much he loves MJ, Peter musters the strength to emerge from the spider and pull himself out of the ground. Kraven, content with how he conquered his foe, kills himself, robbing Spider-Man of the satisfaction of apprehending the man who buried him alive. But emerging from the grave is one of the defining moments in the history of Spider-Man comics and a demonstration that Spider-Man's love for Mary Jane conquered all. Number 2, stopping the Juggernaut. For Amazing Spider-Man 229 to 230, Stern wrote arguably his greatest story of all, Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut, pitting Spidey against the X-Men villain, Juggernaut. In addition to his incredible strength, Juggernaut's power is that once he's in motion, he cannot be physically stopped. Stern smartly frames this confrontation as Juggernaut's unstoppable force versus Spider-Man's unbreakable, never-say-die spirit. Over the course of the 2 issues, Spidey keeps raising the stakes, at one point even driving a gasoline tanker truck into Juggernaut. Peter is able to finally subdue his opponent when he jumps on Juggernaut's back, blocking his vision and steering him into a pit of wet cement. As the cement dries, Spider-Man is satisfied to know that while he didn't technically defeat the Juggernaut, he did stop him in his tracks, proving that something can, in fact, stop the Juggernaut. Number 1, If This Be My Destiny. In this storyline, Peter's Aunt May is hospitalized and on the verge of death after receiving a transfusion of her nephew's radioactive blood. Peter's friend Kurt Connors develops a serum that can save May, but the Master Planner, later revealed to be Dr. Octopus, steals it. During the ensuing battle, Doc Ock's base collapses, burying Spider-Man under tons of steel and debris. The serum is just out of reach. Spider-Man bemoans the fact that his final act alive ultimately dooms his aunt, the one person he cares for more than any other. He also thinks about how his selfish behavior when he first became Spider-Man led to his Uncle Ben's death. That's when Spidey vows to persevere. He famously says, "Anyone can fight when the odds are easy. It's when the going gets tough, when there seems to be no chance, that's when it counts." He lifts the steel above his head, grabs the serum, and saves his aunt. It is, indisputably, Spider-Man's greatest triumph. And isn't that all very nice and heartwarming? But let's move on to something a bit more depressing. Let's talk about the times Spider-Man failed. Number 5, the end of Spider-Man. While fighting the Green Goblin in Amazing Spider-Man 17, Spidey flees the scene when Peter overhears that his Aunt May has suffered a heart attack. Spidey's longtime rival in the press, Daily Bugle editor J. Jonah Jameson, has a field day with this development, branding Spidey a coward and destroying what little credibility he has left with the public. Peter, meanwhile, questions whether or not he can go on risking his life as Spider-Man with his aunt in such a sad shape. He resigns himself to an early retirement, even as Sandman starts to terrorize the city. After a pep talk from his Aunt May, he does return, but still, Peter gives up, and gives up hard, for a decent while. Number 4, the inferior Spider-Man. The comic book continuity was shocked back in 2012 when Dr. Octopus found a way to switch minds and bodies with Peter Parker. Otto vows to do everything better than his clown of a predecessor, despite the fact that Peter, in ghost form, still exists as a lingering memory in Otto's brain. After discovering Ghost Peter in Superior Spider-Man number 8, he and Peter square off in the Mindscape in Superior Spider-Man number 9. During the battle, Otto preys upon Peter's trademark guilt and sense of responsibility. He brings up a moment from the previous issue where Peter almost prevented Otto from performing surgery on a dying little girl. Otto uses this fleeting moment of hypocrisy to crush his despondent opponent. Peter essentially gives up and is wiped from existence. We won't hear from him again until Superior Spider-Man 25. Number 3, the final chapter. In the late 90s, Marvel was in the midst of rebooting most of its core titles. As a precursor to its fresh take on Spider-Man, the publisher released the final chapter, a 4-part storyline that pits Spidey against his arch nemesis, the Green Goblin, one last time. During the battle, the Goblin reveals that he staged the death of Peter's Aunt May. He also somehow implants a genetic bomb in May's brain that will detonate if someone tries to remove it. After Reed Richards saves Aunt May and removes the bomb, Spider-Man makes a groundbreaking decision. He throws his Spidey outfit into a burning trash can and vows to hang up the webs for good. Number 2, Spider-Man No More. Arguably the most famous of all the Spider-Man quits stories, the landmark Amazing Spider-Man 50 shows how all of the negative press Spider-Man gets from the Daily Bugle is overwhelming Peter. Additionally, Peter is smitten with his beautiful classmate Gwen Stacy and wonders what life would be like if he just quit being Spider-Man and lived a normal teenage life. In one of the most iconic scenes in comic book history, Peter dumps his costume in a trash can and walks away. He then commences living it up as a regular Joe, although is eventually tempted back into being Spider-Man upon remembering the lesson he learned in Amazing Fantasy 15. Great power, great responsibility, all that jazz. Number 1, handing responsibility over to his clone. In the mid-1990s, Marvel decided to mix up the Spider-Man status quo in a dramatic fashion by reintroducing Spidey's clone. Over the course of many stories, it is revealed that the clone, Ben Reilly, is actually the real Spider-Man. Concurrently, Peter learns that he and Mary Jane are expecting a child. After this moment, Peter decides in Spectacular Spider-Man 229 that his family is his top priority. He hands over his Spider-Man costume to Ben and walks off into the sunset with MJ. This moment takes the top of this list because it marks the longest time that Peter was away from Spider-Man after quitting. For the next year, Ben is the main character in the Spider-Verse, but fans lost interest in a Spider-Verse with a perceived pretender as the lead. Peter is eventually brought back, and Peter finds out that the whole clone saga was just some big master plan orchestrated by Norman Osborn. And master plan is just the word, as it managed to keep Peter Parker from being Spider-Man for over a year. And there you have it, folks. 5 times Spider-Man overcame great odds, and 5 times he quit. Feel free to drop a comment down below with your own favourite Spidey wins or Spidey losses, and drop this video a like if you enjoyed it. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.